Okay guys, with me here is a very simple fast API that has a few paths or URLs here, and I want us to focus on two URLs. One is the app.get users slash, then we have the parameters, that is user ID. User ID here is a path parameter, and then we have a static path here, that is the users slash me. So I want us to focus on these two, 26 to 33. Now, if I run this server and test it on my browser, let's see what we have. Now, by default, we have it writing on port 8000, and we get a hello world because we are visiting the home route. How about if we try to visit our users path here? Let's see what happens. So here we have 8000, and then we want to add a path users. What we get back is an array which is bin and elfo, and that is what we expect because that is what we define on line 24 that says return an array having two items, bin and elfo. Now forget about line 22 to 24, so we'll collapse that. I want us to focus on line 26 until the end. So here we have two paths that are kind of the same. If you look at it, we have app.get users, and then we have a path parameter of user ID. User ID here is a path parameter, which means it's dynamic. You can pass any parameter. It could be an int or a string, but as you can see here, ours has a type annotation of string, so we expect the parameter here to be string. On line 31, we have app.get users and slash me. This is a very static path. It won't change. It will always be slash me. Now, in a scenario where we have, let's say, in your application, you want a user to view his or her profile, and if they visit their profile, this endpoint is called users slash me. And then we have, let's say we have an admin functionality that allows you to fetch for users using their ID. So does this order really matter? Because by default, this will expect something like, let's say if our app is running on HTTP localhost 8000, and then we have now the users itself, and then now the path parameter user ID, let's say user ID of FJKU. Okay, now remember, this is now the actual argument that you're passing to this parameter user ID. In other words, what will be passed to our function here is FJKU because it's a string, and remember the path parameter that we pass here is what the function will take as its parameter. So we expect that when we run this one, we're going to get user ID, and then in return we get FJKU. So let's try running this one with this parameter here. So to confirm this, we're going back to our browser, copy this and come back to your browser, and remember it's the path users, and then we pass the parameter which is a string. So what do we get back when we do that? We get user ID with an ID of FJKU, and that is what we had in our parameter on top here. Good. Now, coming back to our code, we also have another route that it says users slash me, but this is static. We don't have to add any parameter. It's very static, and we expect that when we hit this endpoint, we get user ID and then the current user ID. Everything here is static, it's typed, it's not dynamic. So let's try and see what happens when we visit this route here. So I'm going to replace what we have here as FJKU with a me. Let me see what happens. What do we get back? We get back user ID and a me, which is wrong. This is not what we expect. Why? Because we expect that if we visit this route here or this endpoint, we get user ID and then a statement or a string that says this is the current user ID, right? What happens, or what usually happens when you design your APIs of the routes? These routes are evaluated in order. So if it encounters the first route here, it will assume that we are trying to pass the me here as a path parameter. You see what happens? So in that case, that is why if we come here and pass a me, it treats it as a path parameter instead of treating it as a static parameter. And therefore, let's see what happens when we switch or arrange the order in which these routes appear. For that matter, I'll take this here, cut it, and then come just before the path that has a parameter here and paste. When we paste here, let's now go back here and then refresh. What do we get? We now get user ID and then the current user. Now, this is what we expect that our API should give us. Now, this tells us, or simply points to us, that the order in which you define your endpoints really matters, especially for a parameter that has a path parameter and one that is static, but they share the same base paths. For example, users/me and users that expects a parameter of user ID. In this case, when it evaluates, or our server runs, it first evaluates from top coming down in order. So it comes here, it gets a user's me, and then returns that. And then it goes next, which means if you pass anything other than the me here, it will treat that as a user ID parameter. And that is why even if you come back to the browser here and even add another string like me here, that will still give us the user ID, then me here is like the ID of that user. So to explain this in a nutshell, when defining or designing your APIs, usually ensure that your static paths or your static URLs come before any URL or endpoint that expects a parameter. Like users/me is static, that is okay. Ensure it comes before a users/user ID, where the user ID here is a path parameter. And with that, you'll have good APIs, good endpoints that won't conflict. Thank you for watching this video. See you in another video. Osego Code signing out.